I'm an award-winning mathematician. Trump just cut my funding. He's been doing this for all the sciences. Like, genuinely, investment, federal grants into all of the scientific fields have been cut dramatically. The country is being gutted. It's not good. Science in America is over, lol. Yep, it's going to be China and the European Union from now on. Very, very grim. Why would any top scientist choose to stay in the United States in this environment where the people who run the government are like objectively anti-science? Jesus, did you hear about how California had its first case of the plague in a while? I don't think that's even because of RFK, but it feels like it should be. Sort of a biblical portent. Infected flea bite during Lake Tahoe visit.
All right, let's get you some other news as well. The CDC warning of the outbreak of a mosquito-borne virus. It's in China, and the Chinese government...
Nope, that is a different thing. We're talking about the plague. A California resident has tested positive for the plague. Does anyone else think it's really funny that because America sort of linguistically is a European country, because English is, we talk about the Black Death, like we call it the plague, even though plague is like a generic term? Like, we talk about it like it's a feature in a Destiny game, you know what I mean? The plague. How long do you think we're going to do that? Like, how long into the future do you think the plague is going to be the disease no one gets anymore? It's going to be like 1,000 years after the Black Death ravaged Europe, and people are still going to say the plague in reference to something that, like, functionally doesn't happen anymore. It's been centuries, and we still call it the plague. Like, when are we going to call the flu the plague? It's also a plague. Like, a plague, right? I don't know. The Black Death was that bad? Yeah, we haven't had anything worse since. Not yet, at least. Like, the Spanish flu wasn't even close. Ebola? Smallpox was similarly evil and we got rid of it. I don't think it compares to the Black Death, though, man. The Black Death, like, for 200 years, just... people are so pessimistic about the future, man. People hear about like one disease outbreak, they freak out. Back when everyone had peasant brain because they were literally peasants, we dealt with 2 consecutive centuries of people like using sheep's blood to mark the doors of infected households. Like there were corpse carriers in every town that would go door to door with wagons. Like it's crazy, you know? Yeah, smallpox has killed more people in total, but I don't think it's had the same social impact. Unfortunately, we just don't have that many records of what smallpox did to Native Americans. Most of the Native Americans, the indigenous people of the Americas, died without contacting European civilization. It just made its way westward. Not really anyone's fault, just bad luck. But we don't have many writings on that, unfortunately, which is a shame because that would probably be some of the most depressing shit in the world, right? You basically have, at least in some parts of the Americas, like pastoral or like hunter-gatherer paradises that were endlessly fertile and civilizations that existed there for thousands of years, and then with no contact to anyone else, just a wave of death made its way from coast to coast and took out everybody. Crazy. Well, smallpox blankets, I'm pretty sure that our historical like, the smallpox blanket thing is overstated. We have a couple of very, very scarce historical references to them, but, like, overwhelmingly, the natives who died of smallpox just died because the disease made its way westward. Europeans had it and had resistance to it, and the natives didn't, and it just whoosh. Like, it was mostly just us killing them. No. No, you need to understand, okay? The overwhelming majority of Native Americans who died without ever meeting a European. They just died to a pandemic that raced across the, like, millions and millions and millions of people who, yeah, didn't know what germ theory was. No one did, right? Died basically to them magically. Like, when Europeans came and moved westward and started killing the Indians afterwards, we were killing the tiny, desiccated remnants of once vast populations. Like, yeah, the smallpox blanket thing, that was like, we had, the only reference we have to that historically, if I remember correctly, is like one guy writing letters about how they should do it or something. There's no like documented widespread practice. Overwhelmingly, the death of the natives was just unfortunate historical happenstance. Of course, the Europeans then came in and finished the job, so we're not trying to give them credit, but in terms of raw numbers, a lot of this was just bad luck. If you think about it, the Europeans arrived at a post-apocalyptic situation. Basically, yeah, essentially, yeah. I don't know how it could have been prevented. It probably couldn't have. Well, it probably would have helped if we didn't, like, kill a bunch of Indians afterwards. Didn't they bring the smallpox, though? Yeah, but they didn't know what the that was. That was before germ theory. The Europeans had no idea. Why is the bubonic plague back again? Yeah, for fun. All right, local cryptid, stay safe, okay? You can read about it in Spanish sources. The conquistadors in Peru were astonished that the cities they first saw were depopulated, and they were because of smallpox and resulting civil war. Yeesh. No, anyway, sorry. Just interesting stuff. So wait, did we bring over Ameripox, or did that just happen on its own? What do you mean? We got syphilis, I think, from the New World, right? But we brought over a bunch of nasty shit from, like, people in London drinking each other's poop. But they didn't know what they were doing. Was still a genocide, to be clear. You don't need to virtue signal. It's already a woke community. Yes, obviously, everyone here believes that the Europeans committed a genocide in the New World. Everyone here already agrees with that. That being said, a lot of people do think that the smallpox ravaging the native population was some kind of deliberate, targeted European effort. It just wasn't. It's just not true. The vast majority of the death was circumstantial, which is, in a way, a lot more terrifying. You know, you want to assign, like, good guys and bad guys to these grand historical narratives. The idea that what could have been an intercivilizational contact point instead turned into a one-way wave of death through no evil on the part of the Europeans. Again, they didn't know they were bringing smallpox over, right? Like, the evil was other things, but that particular wave of death was not malicious. It wasn't intended, you know. Just crazy. It's really spooky to think about. Kind of War of the Worlds stuff, but in reverse, right? Like if the big, like, Martian alien pods had brought a disease that just killed all of us, like we you know, tried to resist them, and then all the humans just died for no reason. That would suck them out. It would suck if we all died to Martians, yeah. We need to stop having them be aliens and start having them be Martians. You know, when you're watching a goated-ass science fiction property or reading it or whatever, when the aliens are Martians, that's how you know that shit's going to be good. None of this gay-ass, they came here from a black hole warp from a different galaxy or whatever. No, no, no. They were on Mars the whole time. They were just in a cave. Yeah, dude. Absolutely. Yes! Yeah! That's what I like to see. So in the blankets that were given to the natives, they didn't know they were infected. Again, this is a largely overstated thing. We have one correspondence between two Europeans talking about smallpox blankets, hundreds of years after smallpox already eradicated the natives. Functionally, smallpox blankets did not exist, or at least there's no evidence to suggest their existence. The smallpox wave happened hundreds of years before the westward expansion, like massive way, like the death was the disease, because there were millions of natives in the Americas with sophisticated trading networks. They all contacted each other and traded, and, you know, so on and so forth, and probably sucked each other off. And they just gave each other smallpox, because how the could they know, right? They don't know. Gay pandemic. All pandemics are gay as far as I'm concerned. I wonder how many descriptions in Native American culture were based on mid-play documentation. Unfortunately, they just didn't keep records the way that we did. Like the conceptualization of, or like the frequency of civilizations keeping recorded documents is very much a post-agricultural thing, and a bunch of native societies were still not fully developed agricultural societies, because some of the areas they lived in were so abundant they didn't need to. Like the west coast of the United States is so fertile and so full of wildlife that you could build very large population centers off of hunting and gathering, which is crazy. Basically everywhere else in the world, if you wanted a larger population, you would just settle your ass down and start planting wheat or maize or corn or rice or something else. But for some parts of the United States, it was so fertile and abundant, Garden of Eve shit, you know, that they could just have large populations just going out there and getting the food off the ground. And as a consequence, they didn't really have the big developed social institutions that allowed for stuff like, you know, written records. It's also a cultural thing to an extent. And if I'm not mistaken, by the way, didn't they also not have the kinds of woods that we turned into early parchment? Like the Egyptians had parchment that they wrote on, and part of that was because the wood they had access to was easy to turn, yeah, papyrus, right, to turn into parchment. But over, if you were like in southwestern United States, what do you turn into parchment, right? Like if you're in an area where all the trees, you know what I mean? Papyrus isn't paper. Okay, okay, okay. All right, all right. You're all very knowledgeable, but you understand my point, right? Parchment is made from animal skin? Huh. I'll keep that in mind the next time I'm DMing. I didn't know that. Well, anyway, you understand what I'm talking about, right? No, they did have that. The Europeans brought back some agricultural practices from the Americas. Listen, when I talk, I said the West Coast. There were agricultural practices over on the East Coast. That's where we got the maize and the grain and the blah de blah. I'm talking about over in the West Coast. You have to listen. Yeah, tomatoes. And then Italians went crazy with them or something. Anyway, the point that I'm trying to get at is I don't think they had the same kind of record keeping. True, but we use stylus and clay. Yeah, but the natives also had stylus and clay, like some of their civilizations, right? But there's a big difference between writing down like basic shit on clay tablets and writing down books where you describe things extensively, right? Like I just think that in the civilizational tech tree, they hadn't really gotten to a point where there was a consistent need for that. And a lot of that is also because, generally speaking, written language systems are made for ledgers, right? The reasons we develop written communication systems is because of trade, right? Trade, mercantilism, keeping track of debt, right? There are like accounting, basically, because you want to be able to write down how many peace pipes or feathers or whatever you owe each other. And these societies did do that, but I don't think they developed to a point where they did it to the extent that you would need really sophisticated forms of written record communication. It's really, really interesting stuff. Really interesting stuff, like the fact that the Incans used a system of knots and beads on rope because Incan civilization was built really high up in the mountains, and they didn't want to do their mountain climbing with backpacks full of clay tablets. So when they did trade, rather than carrying like 50 pounds of clay that can shatter and weighs you down, they were like, what, knots on a quipu, yeah, on the string, and then that allows us to bring this recorded information, Anyway, it's all complicated. I'm not an anthropologist. I don't know. I'm not an anthropologist.